Chapter 16 The Invite. Alice decided to leave the house early that morning and meet up with Sammy and Brian for coffee before they all headed to work. They met at a coffee shop about a block away from work, so that the walk wouldn't be too rushed on the way to the office. "What do you think of Ophelia?" asked Sammy. "She's creepy is what I think," said Alice. "How about you, Brian? What do you think?" "She looks exactly like your type." "Yeah, out of his league," laughed Sammy. "Ugh, Sammy. When are you going to grow up?" snapped Brian while looking at Sammy from the corner of his eyes. "She is hot though." Yeah, we're sure you noticed that," said Sammy. "But on the real though, what was up with Christina? She looked so scared yesterday. I wonder if she's worried about her job." "What do you mean?" asked Alice. "Well, we can't have two chief editors. So if Ophelia comes on, what position does Christina get moved to? Will she get demoted? I don't understand why Ophelia feels the need to even come on as an editor. Regardless, Christina will probably stay on board due to the fact that Ophelia has such a busy schedule. She probably won't be able to be in office all the time. Also, she doesn't even have an office of her own. So most of her visits will probably be spot checks or whatever." "I'm sure Christina will be fine," Brain chimed in. "She has been there longer than any of us. Plus, the company can't just get rid of her. She's a valuable member to the team." "I hope you're right," said Alice. The elevator doors opened and 3 got off on their floor. Alice was the first to look up and stand in awe of what was happening in front of her. Sammy looked at Alice standing frozen next to her, and then followed her eyes to see what Alice was staring at. When Sammy looked over, she too looked on in disbelief, not even being able to talk. Brian came out of the elevator and laughed at the faces Alice and Sammy were making until he too looked at what was happening in front of them. Christina's office had been completely cleared out, and a group of building contractors were knocking down the wall in order to join it with the office next to it. "I think I know why Christina looked so worried yesterday," said Sammy. "Yeah, me too," replied Alice. "Looks like she fixed that not having an office of her own problem. Ophelia really didn't come to mess around. Let's try not to mess around either. Apparently people are becoming easily replaceable around here." Sammy and Brian agreed and the 3 made their way to their cubicles. When Alice sat down, she saw a little envelope on her table. Alice examined the envelope before opening it, trying to see if she could see who it was from, but the envelope had no stickers nor writing on it. It must be from Oliver, she thought. Alice opened the envelope and found a card inside, an invitation of sorts, and it was not from Oliver, but from Ophelia. "Suck it!" shouted Brian from his cubicle as he stood up to parade around the office. "What is happening right now?" asked Sammy, looking as confused as everyone else. "Ophelia invited me to supper tonight," said Brian while cheering. "Yeah, me too, Dumbus," said Sammy. "Yeah, and me," said Alice, sticking her hand up with the invitation. "Now sit down, you're embarrassing yourself." Sammy pushed her chair over to Alice and looked very happy and excited, confusing Alice even more than Brian, thinking Ophelia was into him. "You know what these invitations mean, right? Ophelia is trying to show us that we're valuable members of the team. She probably wants to show us that our jobs are secure. That's why she's been doing all these reviews of our projects before we got to meet her." "You sure that's why she wants to take us out for dinner?" asked Alice. "Positive, trust me girl, we are secure. I mean, it's weird that Brian got invited too, but she probably didn't want to make it too obvious. But look at everyone else who got an invite. Jeffrey, Anna, Troy and Jason. Those are all the top guys. This has to be about our performance. Also, you just finished that big Oliver Page project and she was really impressed. This might be your chance to climb the ladder." Alice looked at Sammy and smiled, but thought to herself that all of what was happening seemed a little estranged. What was the real reason for this invitation? Christina has been fired that very morning, and now the same person who fired her was inviting the office out for cocktails. What are her motives? Chapter 17 The Dinner. When Alice and Sammy got to the restaurant, they realized that everyone from the office had already arrived, Ophelia included. When they walked in, they noticed that the tables of the restaurant had been pushed to the sides of the room, and the food was all being served as a buffet. Alice looked around and saw all her colleagues that were invited, mingling amongst themselves along with some other people that she did not recognize, probably business associates of Ophelia, Alice assumed. "Hey, you guys are finally here," said Brian, walking towards them with a plate filled with savories, almost as much as he had stuffed in his mouth. "Ophelia sure knows how to throw a party, am I right?" "Chew, swallow and then talk, it's a normal process that humans follow, Brian," said Sammy, already looking irritated with him. "Come on, chill out. Grab a few drinks and get some shrimp. No ways we can afford to eat here on our salaries." "He has a point," said Sammy, looking over at Alice. Alice rolled her eyes and allowed herself to be led to the bar by Sammy and Brian. The three ordered their drinks, and as they waited, Ophelia noticed Alice and Sammy and broke away from her conversation to come over and greet them. "Hey, I'm glad you made it." "Hello," said Alice, turning to face Ophelia. "Thank you again for the invitation." "It's my pleasure," said Ophelia. "Actually, the reason for this little dinner party was just to clear the air about what happened this morning." "This morning?" "Yes, with Christina leaving. She probably didn't mention anything to the team so as not to alarm anyone, but she had been planning to leave for quite some time and didn't know how to tell you." "Wait, so she wasn't let go?" asked Sammy. "Oh God, no," replied Ophelia. "Christina was a core member of the magazine, and all the work and effort she put into the company will not be forgotten. She was actually offered a new position at another magazine in California, and didn't come in today because she had a couple of loose ends to tie up. Also, she told me she just couldn't bear to see you guys because it would tear her apart. She really cares about you." "Yeah, she really does, and so do we," replied Alice. "She's the one who kept us on after our internships. Myself, Sammy, and Brian owe her quite a lot. I'm guessing this little dinner was your way of saying goodbye and thank you." "Right you are. I have no idea where the woman of the hour is though. Hopefully she comes soon. But for now just grab a couple of drinks and enjoy the food." Sammy and Alice watched as Ophelia walked off to greet another group of executive-looking types that had walked in. "Wow, so maybe we misjudged her," said Sammy while sipping at her drink. "I mean, we thought she got rid of Christina, but Christina was already planning to leave and it sounds like she got a pretty nice offer." "Something still doesn't add up though." "What do you mean?" "Well, I understand Ophelia's intentions to give Christina a proper farewell, but why not invite the entire office? Look at the people she invited, it's only the top guys at the magazine. Maybe she's trying to win over anyone with any sort of influence." "I think you're being a little paranoid," said Sammy. "Listen, I know things have been a bit weird since this Oliver thing happened, which I still do not know the whole story to, but you have to ease up. Give her a chance, okay?" "Alright, fine, you have a point. Thank you, I know. Now loosen up." Alice took her drink and went out to the floor to speak with her colleagues. Everyone spoke highly about the food and wine, saying that they should savor the moment. Alice looked at all her colleagues and they all seemed to be much more relaxed than this morning about the situation with Ophelia, and she felt herself relaxing a bit as well. She had been so stressed out ever since Oliver Page had showed up that she had forgotten what it was like to be around normal people with normal problems. Maybe Ophelia did know Oliver from the business world, and maybe she didn't bring with her any dark mysteries or secrets or curses. Alice looked over and saw Sammy speaking to some guy that was invited by Ophelia from outside the office. Then she looked over at Ophelia and saw that she was speaking to Brian and another colleague of hers named Jason. Jason was very shy, so speaking to women made him very uncomfortable, and speaking to a woman that looked like Ophelia was probably enough to send him into the ER. Ophelia looked over at Alice and waved at her to come over, but Alice felt like removing herself from the crowd for a bit, and felt like sitting down and just smiled at Ophelia, telling her she felt like grabbing a seat just to rest her feet. Ophelia nodded and then continued her conversation with Brian and Jason. Alice sat for a while on her own and started to feel the exhaustion that she'd been trying to suppress for the past couple of days. She looked down at her wristwatch and saw that it was only 10 p.m., yet she felt completely drained. She then got up in search of Sammy to let her know she was leaving, seeing that Sammy could possibly have another ride home with her new friend. Alice found Sammy and assumed correctly. The two were all over one another and Alice said her goodbyes. "Are you sure you're okay to leave?" asked Sammy. "Yeah, don't worry about me. It's just that these late nights have been killing me. I'll see you tomorrow." Alice then went in search of Ophelia in order to thank her for the party. Christina had not arrived yet and maybe would still have come, but it was still a nice dinner and she did have a nice time and thought she could just see Christina another time. Surprisingly, when Alice found Ophelia, she was just standing with Jason and he didn't have his usual shy demeanor. Rather, he looked to be quite comfortable. The two looked like they were hitting it off. They were probably speaking about his articles on the marine conservation projects that he had been busy with and was sure to be a big piece when completed. "Hey, sorry to interrupt," said Alice, feeling a little bad for killing their vibe. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything tonight." Ophelia turned around and looked at Alice while placing her hand on her shoulder. "Hey, why does it sound like you're leaving? It's still so early. You and I never got a chance to talk." "Yes, I know, and I'm really sorry about that," replied Alice. "It's just that I've had a long couple of days and the exhaustion caught up to me a bit. Hopefully we can talk another time," said Alice as she stuck out her hand to shake Ophelia's. "I understand," said Ophelia. Ophelia took Alice's hand and said goodbye. "She's beautiful, don't you think?" said Ophelia to Jason as the two watched Alice walk to get her things and make for the exit. Yes, she is, replied Jason. Too bad she'd never go for a guy like me. What do you mean? Asked Ophelia. Look at you, you're a catch. Let me tell you something. Ophelia leaned over to Jason and put her lips close to his ear and whispered, Don't tell Alice I told you this, but I overheard her speaking to Sammy earlier and she told her she thought you were really cute, and that she wished you'd just make a move already. She really said that? Asked Jason while looking into Ophelia's eyes as she withdrew her head. Jason's pupils were dilated and he looked as if he was staring into an abyss, for his eyes looked lifeless like that of a puppet, and that was exactly what Ophelia wanted to see, that Jason was now her puppet. Yes, she did. Be a man, Jason, go after her, said Ophelia. Maybe she won't know it, but she will want you just as much as you want her, so force yourself onto her until she gives in. Yes, that's exactly what I should do, said Jason, sounding more and more like a psychopath as Ophelia watched the seed she had planted inside him grow into something dark and sinister. Go, Jason, she's waiting for. Chapter 18, Bad Intentions. Jason came out of the restaurant and looked around trying to spot Alice, until finally his eyes fell on her on the opposite side of the road. Hey! Shouted Jason while waving, trying to get her attention, but to no avail. The sidewalks were still rather busy and cars were speeding down the road. Jason stepped into the road and dashed towards Alice, still waving at her, calling her name, until finally she saw him and looked in his direction. Jason noticed that Alice was now looking at him, and it distracted him completely as he made his way over the busy road, not even worrying to look out for oncoming cars. Jason managed to get to the opposite side of the road, avoiding any injury, but did manage to get called out by several people who had to slow down and swerve their vehicles in order to avoid knocking him. Alice looked at Jason a little confused about what she had just seen, trying to think why he would run across the road, risking his life. Hey, you okay there? Asked Alice as she looked at Jason slumped over trying to catch his breath. Yes, I'm good. Actually really glad that I caught up with you. I thought I had waited a bit too long after you left and thought I'd miss you when I got out here. But lucky for me, I managed to catch up with you in time. I've been struggling to get a taxi, said Alice. They've been driving past me this entire time and no one is stopping. It's like they don't even want my money. Hopefully I'll get one soon. But hey, what's up? What was so important that you came running over the road like a lunatic? You looked just about ready to start slow dancing with Ophelia when I last saw you, laughed Alice. No, we were just talking, laughed Jason awkwardly. I actually came over to tell you something. Really? Asked Alice. Telling me something was worth risking your life? Well, my plan was actually to catch up with you before you left the restaurant, but like I said, after watching you leave I was a little hesitant about following, but then just decided that hey, no time like the present, am I right? Sure, I guess, answered Alice, now really finding it difficult to track where this conversation was leading. Well, I've never been a guy that's ever had good luck with the ladies, most of the time they barely know I exist. But ever since you started working at the magazine, you've always been very kind to me. Well, you're a very nice person, Jason. You are very respectful and you have very good manners. You know, women like a man that can respect them. Maybe just learn to speak up a bit. I'm sure the right girl will find her way to you. Well, that's kinda why I'm here. I've always had this feeling that you were into me and wanted me to make a move. I'm sorry that I didn't realize it sooner, but I didn't think a girl that looked like you would be interested in a guy like me. Alice looked at Jason trying to process what was being said. Yes, she had smiled at him around the office, but it was not a smile that held any intentions. She was just a person that tried to have a good relationship with her colleagues. She didn't feel at all that her smile would make Jason feel like he was being led on in any sort of way. Jason, I think you might have gotten the wrong impression. You're a nice guy and all, but I'm sorry. Hey, it's okay. I know you've been trying not to say anything or drop any hints, but I know, so it's fine. Wait, what do you mean? I know that you were telling Sammy earlier at the dinner that you were hoping that I'd make a move. So it's fine, you can stop playing hard to get. Jason, are you okay? Alice looked at Jason, who now had a weird look in his eyes. His pupils dilated and she felt his stare burning into her face. He did not look like his usual self and Alice felt a slight feeling of unease as she backed up from him. Jason, I don't know who told you that, but it isn't true, I'm sorry. I actually need to get going. My mom is probably worried sick about me at home. Why not go back to the party and I'll see you at work tomorrow, okay? Alice turned to walk away from Jason to try and get a taxi a bit further up the road when she felt Jason's hand tightly grip her wrist, stopping her from leaving. Alice, stop the games. I know you want this. Jason pulled her back and tightened his grip even more, making Alice groan in pain. Alice stared at Jason. Not being able to make a sound for the unease that she had felt had now turned into shock and fear. Jason, please let go of my arm, you're hurting me. Alice felt the pain shooting up through her arm and tried wiggling herself free, but the more she struggled, the more Jason squeezed. Stop fighting your feelings, Alice. Just let go. I know you want me. Maybe you don't know it yet, but I can show you. Jason, what the FCK are you saying? Get off of me now. Alice forced her arm out of his grip and rushed backwards but did not take her eyes off of Jason. She watched as he stared at her, like a predator waiting for their prey to let their guard down. You're f***ing sick, Jason, shouted Alice. Stay the hell away from me. Alice turned and ran as fast as she could but did not let her guard down. She stuck her hand in her bag, taking out her pepper spray as she kept turning back to see if Jason was following her. But no, he just stood there, watching her until finally she managed to get to the traffic light at the end of the road where she found a taxi and took off. Chapter 19. Plans are set in motion. Jason stood on the now empty sidewalk, staring into the direction that Alice had run from him. He felt the burning feeling of wanting to confess his love and desire for her disappear. What just happened? Thought Jason to himself. Why did I just do that? Why did I just try forcing myself onto Alice? Oh no, what if she thinks I'm a bad person? She definitely does, who wouldn't after what just happened? Jason looked down at his hands and looked at them as if they were covered in filth. He tried wiping them on his pants but the dirt would not come off. I'm not a bad person, cried Jason as he wiped and wiped. He felt dirty and disgusted with himself. Jason sobbed in the empty street but didn't care if there were any people, or not because it wouldn't change how he felt on the inside. The humiliation that came with his actions would end his career, he thought. Alice would probably tell everyone he was a creep and that he forced himself onto her, ruining his reputation. How can I fix this? Maybe she won't say anything and know it was a misunderstanding? No FCK, that won't happen. Jason stood, contemplating his next move when he looked across the road and saw Ophelia standing outside the restaurant. Ophelia waved at him and Jason made his way back over the road. So how did it go? Asked Ophelia with a look of concern on her face. Why do you look like you were crying? Are you okay? I don't know what came over me, said Jason as he looked down at the ground in shame and fume led over his words. I tried speaking to Alice and at first she was really nice, but then I brought up the conversation you told me you overheard between her and Sammy, and she denied everything. I got so frustrated speaking to her about it, but she just wouldn't listen. Then I grabbed her arm and tried pulling her towards me and forcing myself onto her. She got scared and ran away. What am I going to do? What if she tells people I tried to hurt her? I didn't mean to, I don't know what came over me. I'm a good person, I'm a good person. Jason sobbed as he dropped to the ground, holding his eyes trying to stop the tears from gushing out, but they would not stop. The thought of losing his career and also the shame that would follow him for the rest of his life drove him insane, and he still could not understand why he had done what he did. Ophelia looked down at the broken man who knelt before her feet, watching as he cried, knowing how helpless he was. She smiled at her handiwork for her plans were working out perfectly, and she now had the perfect pawn to manipulate. Jason, stand up. Jason rose slowly but kept his eyes fixated at the ground. The shame he felt made his face feel heavy and he could not bear to look up at anyone. Jason, I know you're a good man. You're sweet and humble and everyone that I spoke to at the office all spoke very highly of you. They all love you, Jason. Jason now lifted his head and looked at Ophelia as she smiled at him and wiped the tears from his face. Jason, you're still going to do great things. But how? Asked Jason. If Alice tells people what I did, then there's no way you can keep me on. I know you had big plans for me, Ms. Anderson, but I really let you down. Jason, let me ask you something. Do you care about your career and all the good work you do? Yes, of course. I get the chance to help so many lives and clean the planet and make a big impact on the world. If I lose this job, I won't be able to do that ever again. I love this job more than anything, and I would do anything to keep it. If Alice tells people, you will definitely lose your job, Jason. I think you're great, but if Alice puts a complaint on my desk tomorrow about sexual harassment, it's going to look a little suspicious if I don't do anything about it. So what should I do? You could make it so that she never gets the chance to put that complaint on my desk. I mean, she could put your whole life at risk, making people think you're something you're not. In my opinion, she sounds like the bad guy. She sounds like she wants to ruin the reputation of a man who just doesn't deserve it. Yes, you're right. She is the bad guy. I didn't do anything wrong. I'm a good person, she's the one planning on spreading lies about me. I won't be doing anything wrong if I try to stop her. Exactly, said Ophelia as she looked on at her creation. She watched as the black seed she planted within him corrupt his heart more and more. He was now filled with anger and jealousy and hatred, a man driven to the edge. Alice woke up the next morning and sat up in bed, still thinking about what had happened with Jason. She never felt that he was capable of doing what he did, and she couldn't help but feel frustrated that not even the normal parts of her life felt normal anymore. She looked at her wrist and the bruise that was left from Jason's grip. Why? It just doesn't make sense, Alice screamed. Alice leaned over to her beside table and picked up her phone and looked through her contacts before finding Oliver's name. I wonder if I should phone him? Alice asked herself. Although Oliver was the one who started this crazy series of events, it was still him that Alice felt she wanted to confide in. He would probably understand better than anyone. Alice dialed the number and listened to the phone ring for a time that felt like an eternity. Alice waited for Oliver to answer, but the phone just rang and Alice decided that Oliver must be preoccupied. Alice took the phone away from her face in order to put the call down, when finally she heard a voice from the side of the line, Oliver's voice. Hello, Alice? Hey, I'm sorry that I didn't pick up. I left my phone downstairs when I came up to my room earlier. I was out last night sorting out a couple of things with Trevor and I just got back. Are you okay? A part of Alice wanted to lie and say yes, but she felt like lying to Oliver and especially to herself would just make it that she would implode sooner rather than later. Hey Oliver. To tell you the truth, I am not okay. I understand that I am some sort of reincarnation, and that I am not destined to have a normal life, but FCK, it's just so hard. Please Oliver, please. Tell me this gets easier. Tell me that all the people that came before me came to a point where things just became easier to bear. The phone went silent, but Alice could still hear Oliver's breathing on the other side. He didn't know how to tell her the things she needed to hear and not the things she wanted to. Do you mind meeting me after work tonight? Asked Oliver. I can fetch you from the office and we can maybe go out. Yeah, sure, replied Alice hesitantly. She still thought of the night before, and for some reason it had left an impression on her that felt stronger than when she had been attacked by the vampire, but she agreed. I'll see you later, okay? Alice put the phone down and sobbed silently. Chapter 20, The New Boss. Alice stood in the lift with her files in hand, still trying to figure out what to do with the situation regarding Jason. He had forced himself onto her and it was unacceptable. But Alice could not get the thought out of her head that the Jason from the night before was not acting like himself. Alice felt conflicted but didn't have time to make up her mind, for she was pushed out of the lift on her floor. Alice looked around the room and saw the group that was invited to the dinner party the night before, Sammy and Brian included, still talking about the party and how much fun they had. Alice looked around in the group and didn't see Jason standing with them and felt a slight sense of relief, but did not completely let her guard down, for he could still have been somewhere within the office. Alice then turned and saw Ophelia's office was complete. All the furniture and desks had been replaced and Ophelia had all the windows tinted. Alice was amazed at how quickly they had done the renovation, but what she found even more amazing was that Ophelia was actually in her office. Alice first thought of going over to Ophelia's office before heading to the bullpen, but quickly dismissed the idea when she could not think of what to say to her. It would probably be proper etiquette to welcome Ophelia to the office, thought Alice. But at the same time, the issue with Jason was more serious and Alice was not sure how to bring that type of topic up first thing in the morning, especially on Ophelia's first day. Instead, Alice decided to make her way into the bullpen, and as she walked through the lanes of the bullpen, she was spotted by Sammy, calling over to come and join the group. Hey, for someone who left so early last night, you're getting to work rather late, said Sammy as she turned to face Alice. Hey, yeah. I just had a tough time getting out of bed this morning, said Alice with a forced giggle. Right, agreed Sammy. I mean, I wanted to leave for work, but the guy I was with made it really difficult to make me want to get up. But alas, here I am. What about you though? What kept you in bed? I need to tell you too something, said Alice as she sat down by her cubicle. Sammy and Brian broke away from the group and joined Alice at her desk. What's up? Asked Brian. Before I say anything, I need to ask you a question, Brian. Okay, sure. Was Jason acting weird with you last night at all? Did he seem off in any way? No, he was completely fine. He was mostly his usual shy self, but he managed to mingle with most of the people at the party. Why do you ask? Well, when I left last night, he followed me into the street and ran through the road, not caring if he'd be killed or not, and confessed his feelings to me. Wait, what? Gasped Sammy as she jumped back holding her chest. Just say that one more time. He did what? Brian, what do you know about this? I had no idea, said Brian, sounding confused. He's never mentioned it before. Also, that is very out of character for him. What did he say to you, Alice? Jason said that he knows I want him. He said that someone had told him that they had overheard me and Sammy talking about him, And he said that I was telling Sammy that I wish he had made a move already because I wanted him. What the FCK? Who would have told him that? Asked Sammy furiously. He didn't say, replied Alice. But as soon as I tried walking away he grabbed me by the arm, pulling me towards him. Alice unbuttoned her sleeve and lifted it up, revealing to Sammy and Brian the bruises around her arm from where she was grabbed by Jason. Sammy and Brian looked on in disbelief before Alice pulled her sleeve back down and buttoned it up again. He said I wanted him and I was just too scared to admit it and that he could show me. Show you? What the FCK does that mean? Asked Sammy. I don't know because I didn't stick around to find out. I got him off of me and bolted for a taxi in the opposite direction. Thank God you're okay, said Sammy. FCK, what a psycho. Explains why he isn't at work today. He isn't here? Asked Alice. Yeah, just relax, said Brian. What are you going to do about it? Asked Sammy. I haven't figured that part out yet, said Alice. Why? What's stopping you from doing it? What he did was completely wrong, barked Sammy. Calm down, Sammy, I know it was. But something about Jason felt off last night. He was just too different. Listen, I've had a lot of craziness in my life these past couple of weeks, so I need to figure things out before I do anything. Are you sure? I'm sure, said Alice while rubbing Sammy's arm. I'm alive, so don't worry, okay? Okay, replied Sammy. Don't worry me like that again, though. Sammy and Brian went to their cubicles when Anne, one of Alice's colleagues, came over to her. Hey, Anne, what's up? Asked Alice. Hey Alice, Ophelia wants to see you in her office. What for? Beats me. She just told me to get you over there as soon as possible. Thanks, Anne, said Alice. Alice got up and made her way to Ophelia's office and thought about telling her about what had happened with Jason, but she also couldn't help but wonder why Ophelia wanted to see her. Alice knocked on the door and Ophelia signaled for her to open in with her hand, not raising her head down from the paperwork she was filling out. I'll be with you in a second, said Ophelia. No, it's no problem, said Alice as she stood in Ophelia's office. The room was cold because of the lack of sunlight, but the decor was extremely beautiful. Ophelia had definitely put a lot of thought into it, thought Alice to herself. Alice then looked back at Ophelia and the locked eyes as Ophelia also raised her head to look at Alice. Hello, Alice, said Ophelia as she smiled at Alice. Hello, replied Alice as she smiled back. I hope you're settling in well. I am, thank you very much, replied Ophelia. I have a couple of first-day jitters, but I think I'll get over it eventually, laughed Ophelia. But anyways, moving on to business. A very exciting article came across my table, and I was wondering if you'd like to write it. Yeah, sure, replied Alice. What's it about? It's about the Egyptian pyramids and the Aztec temples. It's basically a culture piece. No problem, boss, replied Alice. Alice first stood dead still before taking the file off of Ophelia's desk. She thought of telling Ophelia about Jason but could not bring herself to do it and eventually picked up the file and made her way out of the office, closing the door behind her. Alice stood with her back against the door and breathed in and out slowly, trying to calm herself down, and somehow made her way back to her cubicle to do her Chapter 21, Triggered Memory. Alice sat at her desk watching the cursor flicker on her monitor, trying to focus on her work, but could not stop thinking about if she should have said anything to Ophelia or not. Nonetheless, Alice forced herself to work and opened the file that she had gotten from Ophelia and started looking through the work and started digging through the information. The file contained documents regarding ancient Egypt and a possible connection to the Aztec people in South America. It held many images of the hieroglyphics within the pyramids and also images of the carvings found within the Aztec temples. Alice wondered why Ophelia would give her this article to write, as she wasn't accustomed to writing this type of content. Her work was more about investigating and interviewing people who didn't want to talk, not pieces on historical landmarks and ancient cultures. However, she didn't fight it and took it as a challenge to teach herself something new. Alice started reading through all the information and started taking notes on where she would start the article. She fell completely into her work to the point where the thought of Jason didn't even cross her mind, and she felt comfortable doing what she knew best, being a writer and journalist. Perhaps she would tell Ophelia later in the day, but for now, a distraction was what she really needed. Alice typed up the article and found it rather easy because most of the legwork had already been done. Whoever did the research for the piece really did put in the effort. The file contained dates, interviews, images from both Egypt and South America, and a lot of other documents pertaining to the topic. Alice found that she was more interested in this type of topic than she thought she would have been, and felt very passionate about writing the article. However, Alice couldn't shake the thought that everything she was reading felt very familiar. She couldn't remember where she had heard about it, but continued on with her article. As Alice typed, she felt a pain shoot through her head and she flung back into her chair holding her hands up to hold her head. She closed her eyes tightly and tried forcing the pain out, but it would not subside. As Alice kept her eyes closed, she saw images flickering inside her head. Alice saw people standing in front of her but the image was hazed. Alice tried focusing on the image, trying to give in to the pain rather than fight it until suddenly, the pain stopped and Alice dropped her hands. She felt as if her spirit was being transported elsewhere, and felt herself being flung through time and space until everything stopped suddenly, and the image in front of her was now clear as day. It was her and Oliver. Alice looked on in disbelief but remembered that Oliver had told her that this would happen, that she would start to remember her past lives. She tried not to freak out and instead, tried focusing on what was happening in front of her. Alice watched as the two walked through the hallways of a temple, and she looked around and realized that the temple looked exactly like the ones in the pictures that were in the file, given to her by Ophelia. Alice looked back at her and Oliver and saw the two meet up with a group, possibly vampires. Alice watched as the group walked into a room and tried to follow, but the door was shut in front of her and she could not get it to open. Alice then felt her body being sucked up again and being flung around, until she felt herself fall into her chair. Alice opened her eyes and looked at the screen in front of her, watching as the cursor flickered by the last words she had written. She then got up and looked around her, checking to see if anyone had seen anything happen to her. But no one seemed to be looking in her direction. Alice sat back in her chair and fanned herself with some pages on her desk. Alice could not understand what could have triggered her memories to resurface, until her eyes caught a glimpse of an image lying on her desk. Alice sat up and grabbed the picture off of her desk and remembered what she saw in her memories. Alice looked up and looked directly at Ophelia's office. Alice didn't know why, but Ophelia had given her that piece to write for a reason. Alice looked at Ophelia, still going through documents, and felt a slight chill creep up her spine. Did Ophelia really know Oliver from the business world? Alice wanted to believe that, but everything else said otherwise. Alice felt maybe she needed to lie to herself because denial was easier than accepting the superstitious world that Oliver belonged to. However, she couldn't make up her mind on what to do with everything that just happened to her, and she decided to finish the article until she figured out what was happening. Chapter 22. Danger from every direction. Alice packed her bag at the end of the day but never broke eye contact with Ophelia, still sitting in her office. Who is this woman? Alice kept asking herself. What was her relationship with Oliver? Did she know about the curse, and if so, did that put Alice in danger? Alice got lost in contemplation, and was easily startled when Sammy came up from behind to greet her. Hey, I'm heading out, said Sammy. These rich guys do have the best mattresses, but there's just something about your own bed. You know? Alice laughed. Yeah, I know what you mean. Did you manage to speak to Ophelia about Jason? Asked Sammy. Alice felt nauseous hearing both those names and felt like vomiting, but fortunately managed to keep it down. I'll speak to her tomorrow, said Alice, knowing it was a lie. She had no intention of telling Ophelia what happened because at the moment, she couldn't be trusted. Okay, I'm glad you're speaking up. What are you going to do tonight? Asked Sammy. I'm seeing Oliver tonight, replied Alice. Again? Girl, every time you see this man you come to work in pieces. Why do you keep seeing him? I know you aren't the type to stick around because of a big bank account, so what is it? There's a lot I want to tell you, Sammy. I'm just trying to understand it completely myself before I let you in on it. Okay, I understand. Anyway, are you ready to go? We might as well walk out together. Yeah, let's do it, replied Alice as she smiled at Sammy and slung her bag around her shoulder. The two got outside and greeted one another with a hug and parted ways. Alice walked to the right and headed for the coffee shop that was on the next block where she and Oliver had decided to meet that night. Alice walked down the sidewalk, breathing in the crisp winter air when she passed an alley and heard a weird sound coming from it. Alice stopped and looked down the dark alley that had one working light at the end of it, far too little light to light this amount of area. Alice focused her eyes and saw movement by the trash cans that were about 15 feet away from her, too much movement for a cat to make. Alice walked towards the trash cans in order to see what was happening, and tried to make out what it was that she was approaching. Alice got to the trash cans and looked around them and was completely underwhelmed when it was just a homeless man who had made a place to sleep for the night. Alice pulled out $5 and put it under his pillow, then got up and turned around. When Alice turned around, however, she saw something that she wished she wouldn't ever have to see again. Jason. Jason stood by the entrance of the alley and looked on at Alice. Alice, paralyzed by fear, couldn't move her legs and watched as Jason walked slowly towards her until he stood a foot away from her. Hello, Alice, said Jason. Jason, what are you doing here? asked Alice, struggling to get the words out. Alice was filled with fear. She wanted to scream but no sound would come out. Jason made her feel fear that she was not used to feeling. She was filled with fear the last time he had approached her on a busy sidewalk, but now it was different. They were alone in this dark alley and Jason could do to her whatever he wanted, and no one would know. What did you tell the people at work today about last night, Alice? Asked Jason in a calm voice. I hope you didn't lie and tell them I tried hurting you. No, of course not, lied Alice as the cold sweat started to run from her brow. I didn't tell anyone anything. Alice felt unsafe and said whatever she could in order to get away from Jason. She didn't want to admit it, but by the way her body was paralyzed by fear, she knew she felt helpless. She felt more helpless against this man than against the vampire, and that scared her even more. I actually looked for you at work today. Why didn't you come in? I was busy, replied Jason. Busy? With what? Asked Alice. I'm sure it couldn't have been more important than work. It was for work, said Jason, now changing his tone. He sounded serious. I was busy thinking about how important the work I do is, and how many lives I've touched through my work, and how many more lives I can still touch. Well, that's great for you, said Alice while she forced a smile. Yes, that is great. But there's something that is kind of endangering my vision, Alice. You see, I'm not sure I can trust you. Trust me? What do you mean? I'm a little scared that our little misunderstanding from last night might come out by the wrong people, and I don't like that. Jason, you're being silly, giggled Alice. I know it was a misunderstanding. So come back tomorrow, okay? Alice could finally feel her legs and tried walking around Jason when Jason sidestepped and moved in front of her once more. I can't let you leave, Alice, I'm sorry. You'll end my career. Jason struck Alice and Alice fell to the ground, holding her face and looking up with eyes filled with fear. Alice crawled backwards as Jason stepped closer and stood over and struck her again. You think you can just go around spreading lies about good people, shouted Jason. You think it's okay to ruin people's lives? You fking BT. Jason got down on his knees and put his hands around Alice's neck, trying to suffocate her. Alice grabbed at him but could not stop him and felt herself falling in and out of consciousness. Alice put her hand to Jason's face to try and scratch him, but he would not let go. Alice felt her hand slipping from his face as she could not fight anymore and gave in to her fate. Alice apologized to her mother and felt herself slipping away when the pressure around her neck released, and she gasped for air. Alice looked up and saw Sammy standing over Jason's body with a metal pipe, covered in blood, before she passed. Chapter 23, Secrets Coming to Light. Alice fluttered her eyes as she started to wake, trying to figure out where she was. The lights were bright and white and Alice realized she was back at the office. Alice coughed as she pushed herself up from the sofa and still felt the pain around her neck. Alice tried piecing together what had happened as she looked around the room before remembering Sammy. Sammy! Alice called out, but her throat hurt and she could barely get Sammy's name out without coughing. Alice tried to look around but found it difficult to move, but then suddenly felt a hand grabbing her shoulder. Alice turned slowly and it was Sammy holding a cup of water. Hey, are you okay? Asked Sammy, as she put the cup down on the table beside the sofa and sat down next to Alice. Don't strain yourself, you took a couple of heavy blows. Sammy, I'm okay thanks to you, you saved my life, said Alice. I honestly thought I was going to die in that alley, but you came out of nowhere. Wait, why were you even there? Well, when we said our goodbyes I thought I was going to be heading home. But instead, I found myself wanting to go back to the guy from last night. So I turned back and walked in your direction to get another taxi. That's when I heard the commotion in the alley, and saw Jason on top of you with his hands around your throat. Sammy started shivering as the tears rolled down her face. I saw him hurting you, Alice. I got so mad and so scared that I picked up the pole from the ground and hit him as hard as I could and watched as the blood gushed from his head as he fell next to you. I pulled you out and just brought you back to the office. What happened to Jason, Sammy? I don't know. After I got you out from under him, I saw the blood running from his head into the street, and he didn't look like he was moving. I wanted to check if he was still alive, but I panicked and ran out with you as fast as I could. What are we going to do, Alice? What are we going to say? Sammy looked up from the ground and didn't try to hold the tears back anymore. She felt a pain growing in her chest as the reality of what had happened sunk in deeper and deeper. Yes, she had saved Alice's life, but at the expense of another. Sammy, you did the right thing, said Alice while trying to comfort her friend. Listen, I know that you were forced into an impossible situation, but if the roles were reversed, I would probably have done the same thing. We'll contact the authorities and tell them what happened, okay? Don't worry, everything is going to be fine. Alice hated herself for lying because she knew that everything was not fine. Jason's behavior was too random and Alice felt as if she was targeted. And although Alice was scared, she could not show Sammy her true feelings because she needed her friend to believe that everything was going to be okay. Alice tried to think of what to do next, who to call, when she thought of Oliver. He would probably know what to do, thought Alice. Alice looked for her bag and took out her phone when suddenly, Ophelia came around the corner, startling Alice. "Oh, Ophelia, what are you still doing here?" asked Alice. "I didn't expect to see you here," said Ophelia. "I just finished up on all the things I wanted to get done today, so I'm heading out." "Why are you here though? And what's wrong with Sammy?" "I was attacked outside," said Alice as she pulled down her collar to show Ophelia the bruises around her neck. "Sammy rescued me, but we're not sure what happened to the guy who attacked me." "What? Who did this?" asked Ophelia. "It was Jason," said Sammy as she stared down into the ground with tears falling from her face. She wanted to tell Ophelia what she had done and why she looked worse than Alice, but she felt as if she had something stuck in her throat and the words could not escape her. "What, Jason? But why? Did he have something against you, Alice?" "Yeah, he did," said Alice. "I wanted to tell you this morning." "What do you mean? Tell me what?" asked Ophelia. "Last night, Jason forced himself onto me after I left the party. He told me that he was really into me and that I was into him and that he knew I wanted him, which wasn't true. So when I told him that I didn't feel the same way, he lost it and forced himself onto me." "Why did he think that you had feelings for him?" "Apparently someone told him at the party that they overheard me and Sammy talking about him. But I don't know who would have lied to Hi." Alice stopped just before she ended her sentence when she looked at Ophelia, who was now staring at her. Everything made sense now and Alice felt like an idiot because it had taken her so long to figure it out, but it was plain as day. Ophelia was the last person Jason had spoken to before rushing out to her. He was completely normal before that throughout the party. That's why Brian couldn't think of a reason as to why he did what he did. "Who would have?" asked Ophelia. "You didn't finish what you were saying there, Alice." "Yeah, sorry," apologized Alice. "I was going to say, I don't know who would have lied to him." Alice saw the look in Ophelia's eye change and a smile grow on her face, as she watched Ophelia take pleasure in seeing her uncover the truth. Alice felt fear overtake her whole body as Ophelia stepped forward towards her and Sammy. Alice didn't know how to react. Sammy was still looking down at the ground, wallowing in her sadness, and obviously didn't know what was going on. Alice wanted to run, but what about her friend? Would Sammy run if she pulled her without explanation? Alice tried to think of her options, but the closer Ophelia got, the faster Alice's options ran out. Soon, Ophelia had made it all the way to Alice and Sammy and looked at them with a look of amusement on her face. She knew that Alice had nowhere to run, and even if she did, she would have to leave Sammy behind, and that just didn't suit her character. Whatever Ophelia wanted or came for, she could get here right now. Alice stood up and looked Ophelia in the eyes. She knew that over the past couple weeks or even hours, her life has been put in danger multiple times, and she never knew why. Alice thought to herself that if she really was in life-threatening danger, then at least this time she could ask her attacker, why? As the two stared one another down, the elevator at the end of the room opened and Oliver emerged. Oliver looked straight at Alice, then moved his eyes to the person in front of her, Ophelia, who was already smiling in his direction as if she knew he would come. Oliver dashed over to Alice and pulled her out of danger before turning back to face Ophelia. "Ollie, you made it," said Ophelia as her face turned red from excitement to see Oliver. "Why the FCK are you here?" demanded Oliver. Chapter 24. Plot reveal. "I asked you why the FCK are you here?" demanded Oliver. "I work here, Oliver. I should be asking you what are you doing here?" "Don't FCK with me," shouted Oliver. "Why would I FCK with you, Ollie? It's just like I told you the other night. Alice has always been within my grasp. You're the one who shouldn't be f***ing around. Did you even tell Alice about who sent that vampire the other night? Or were you too scared to say my name around her? Too scared to let her memories come back?" "What is she talking about?" asked Alice as she looked at Oliver. Oliver turned around to face Alice and for the first time, Oliver noticed the marks around her neck. "What happened?" asked Oliver as he looked up and down, trying to see if Alice had been injured anywhere else. "Did Ophelia do this to you?" "No, I was attacked on my way to you. Some guy from the office forced himself on me and tried hurting me." "What? Where is he now?" asked Oliver, now softening up as he looked at Alice's wounded neck. "Are you okay?" Alice nodded. "Yeah, I'm okay, Oliver. Sammy found me just in time and we managed to get away." "I was really hoping you'd make it out of that alley," laughed Ophelia from behind Oliver. Everyone now turned to face Ophelia, who looked completely amused at how the situation had turned out. Oliver backed up with Alice while Alice grabbed Sammy's arm and pulled her back with them as they all moved away from Ophelia, making sure not to break eye contact. "Oliver, who is this lady?" asked Alice as she held onto his arm and looked on in fear at the woman who stood before them. "Yeah, Oliver, who am I?" shouted Ophelia. "Tell her who the FCK I am." "Oliver," said Alice as she pulled his arm, making him turn to face her. Oliver looked at Alice with tears in his eyes because he had waited so long for the next reincarnation of Helena, and promised himself that if or when she did come, he would do anything to protect her. He would rather keep things from her and shelter her, rather than burden her with the truth. But he now realized that this was a mistake, and her not knowing the truth did put her in harm's way. He realized that he was so scared of losing her, that it might actually lead to him losing her. "I'm so sorry," said Oliver. "I should have told you everything after the night you were attacked by that vampire in the park. The truth is, the vampire who came after you was sent by Ophelia." "What? Why wouldn't you tell me, Oliver?" "Because I was trying to protect you. Ophelia is the ruler of the Greek vampire clan, and they're extremely dangerous people. The Greek vampires have the ability to serenade men and make them do whatever they want. It's what makes them so dangerous. They manipulate pawns into doing their bidding, so that they don't have to get their hands dirty." "So she sent Jason after me as well?" asked Alice, who now looked horrified at the thought that Jason was forced to do what he did. She knew that the man who attacked her wasn't Jason. "It's possible, yes," replied Oliver. "But what does the Greek clan want with me?" asked Alice. "There are 7 vampire clans that rule within the realm of Albec, the realm where all vampires come from," interrupted Ophelia. "I am in control of the strongest military force within Albec, and since taking the throne, I have expanded my empire to places that most did not think possible. But now I want more." "What do you mean, more?" asked Oliver. "I want it all. I want to rule over the humans. I want to do what no clan has ever had the guts to do. We are fucking vampires, Oliver. We are stronger and faster than these fucking insects. We do not age, we keep our strength and even become stronger over time, so why not take this world for ourselves? Is life not about survival of the fittest? Do humans not kill weaker species to eat them for sustenance? Humans only rule the world because they have evolved to become the dominant species in this realm. So is it really wrong if another species comes along and proves itself to be even more dominant than the dominant species? You will never be able to rule over this world, Ophelia. It is not the same as Albec. Here the sun shines brightly, and you know that we cannot walk in the sun, no matter how strong we are." "True," replied Ophelia. "But there was one of us who could. The first of our kind, King Dracula. He was the perfect being. His strength was unrivaled and he stood at the top of all races." "Those stories aren't true, Ophelia." "That's where you're wrong. King Leon had found evidence of his existence, but kept the evidence a secret. Instead, he only spoke about it with his head of council. I wouldn't have even known about it if I didn't overhear a conversation between them that I was not supposed to hear. They spoke about something that could change everything, Oliver." "What do you mean?" "During one of King Leon's travels, he came across a man who bestowed upon him a vial which held the last remaining blood of King Dracula. Do you know what that means? It means that if I find this vial, and drink King Dracula's blood, I will gain the ability to walk in the sun. I will rule over my livestock here on Earth." "What does any of this have to do with me?" shouted Alice. "What makes you think I have it?" "I know you have it, Alice," smiled Ophelia. "You don't remember receiving it, but in that same conversation, I heard King Leon mention something else, something that none of your other reincarnations even knew." "What is it? Tell me," demanded Alice. "King Leon said that he had sent the blood to a person that no one would be able to track back to him. Someone who he wished he could have made part of his life, but never got the chance to." "Who was this person?" asked Oliver. "Well, that's the fun part, Oliver," laughed Ophelia. "It's Helen." Chapter 25. Get out now. Oliver could not believe what he was hearing. He wanted to think that Ophelia was lying, but why would she? It would explain a lot. Oliver wanted to think longer on it, but realized that staying would put Alice in more danger. Oliver looked around the room and tried plotting an escape route while also checking to see if they were surrounded or not, because if so, it would be very difficult to escape with Alice and Sammy. "Oliver," said Ophelia while trying to get the group's attention, "I can see what you're trying to do. I'm not holding you here against your will. You may leave whenever you so choose. I am not ready to take Alice from you yet. That is why she is still alive. But believe me when I tell you, Oliver, when I am ready, there will be nothing you can do to stop me." You will have no one to turn to, and you will only know despair. I'll find a way to stop you, Ophelia, replied Oliver as he took Alice by the hand and walked her and Sammy to the elevator. Alice was silent and just let Oliver pull her towards safety. She also found it difficult to believe that everything she was hearing was true. The existence of vampires was already difficult to believe, but Dracula? That was something else. Also, what about his blood? Was that part true as well? Was Helena's father really King Leon? Alice wanted answers, but as she looked up at Oliver, she could see that he knew just as much as her. Their best bet would be to get out of the office and get to a safe place so that they could piece things together. They would probably need to take Sammy with them as well, seeing as she wasn't safe anymore. Knowing what she knew, the three waited for the lift but did not drop their guard. They watched Ophelia and kept moving their heads around to check if their surroundings were clear. The doors opened and the three turned to get into the elevator, when Ophelia dashed across the room, too quickly for Oliver to react, and grabbed Sammy by the neck. Oliver and Alice turned around just to watch Ophelia snap Sammy's neck before them. Alice cried out and wanted to run towards Ophelia, but Oliver held her back, stopping her because he knew that there was nothing they could do. Sammy was dead. The two watched as Ophelia threw Sammy's body to the side like a rag doll. The elevator doors closed and Alice burst out crying while slamming her hands against the doors of the elevator. "She's a f***ing monster," shouted Alice. Alice looked out at the city as Oliver drove at top speed. Oliver hated himself for what happened to Sammy because he should have been able to protect her. Oliver looked over at Alice and watched as she cried softly next to him. He felt as if he betrayed her. Sammy died so easily and she was standing right next to them. That could have been Alice, Oliver thought to himself. Ophelia wanted to prove that she could get to Alice, and she succeeded. "Oliver, where are we going now?" asked Alice as she turned to face Oliver while wiping the tears from her face. Oliver turned to face Alice and saw that although she had wiped her tears, her crying was far from over. Oliver wanted to ask Alice if she was okay, but he didn't know how to start the conversation and kind of felt glad that Alice had spoken first. "We're going to my penthouse," said Oliver as he turned back to look at the road. "Okay," replied Alice. "But we need to do one thing before we go." "What is it?" asked Oliver. "We need to go get my mother," said Alice. "If Ophelia's plan is to get to me, my mother probably isn't safe." "That's true," replied Oliver. "Also, Ophelia isn't trying to operate within the shadows anymore. We don't know what to expect next from her, so we have to prepare for anything. Getting your mother and going to my penthouse is the safest thing we can do now." Alice agreed and the two drove straight to Alice's house. When they arrived, Alice took out her keys from her bag and moved them towards the lock when she noticed the door was already open. "This is not supposed to be like this," whispered Alice. "Let me go in first," said Oliver. "Stay behind me." The two walked into the house and noticed that the table that stood by the front door had been thrown over, and all the things that were on the table were scattered all around the floor. "Mom!" shouted Alice, but no one replied. "Wait here, okay?" said Oliver. Oliver ran up the steps and checked the second floor of the house before coming down. "There's no one upstairs." "That can't be," replied Alice. "My mom has to be here. Ophelia couldn't have been here already, could she?" Alice walked around the lounge and saw that the place had been trashed. She ran out and into the kitchen and saw that the kitchen was trashed as well. The cupboards had been broken off of their hinges, the plates were all smashed and the table was against the wall. Alice ran outside and went around to the neighbors in order to see if Hale was by any of them, but no one had seen her. Alice walked back to her house where Oliver waited for her by the front gate. "Ophelia has my mom, Oliver." "We don't know that for sure, Alice," replied Oliver. "Let's go to my penthouse and try to figure things out." "No," shouted Alice. "Stop doing what you're doing. You just want to get me to the penthouse to keep me safe. Do you even care about my mother or about Sammy? Don't get me wrong, Oliver, I don't blame you for her death. There was no way you knew Ophelia would pull something like that. But you have to understand that my mother is part of my life, Sammy was a part of my life. These people mean something to me. I know you love me and I know you want to keep me safe, but I need to protect my loved ones too. Will you please help me get my mother back, Oliver?" "I do care about your mother, Alice. I was going to look for her after I got you back to my penthouse. If Ophelia did take your mother, I know someone who might know where she's being kept. Take me with you." "I don't think that's the best idea, Alice. The person I'm going to meet lives in Albeck." "Will you be able to protect me?" asked Alice. "Yes, but that's besides the point," replied Oliver. "If you can protect me, I don't see why not." "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Oliver, sounding not too excited about the idea. "Yes, I'm sure," answered Alice. "Let's go to Albeck." Chapter 26. Enter Albeck. Oliver and Alice drove to the other side of town where Oliver said he knew of someone who would be able to help them find Alice's mother. However, he did say this person was in Albeck, so how were they going to get there? Wondered Alice. How does one get to Albeck? And who is this person that we are going to see? Asked Alice. There are several portals scattered across the world, answered Oliver. Each portal is guarded by a gatekeeper from a different race within Albeck. The werewolves have their portal in Norway, while the elves have their portal in Ireland. Lucky enough, our portal is right here in New York. Elves exist too? Yes, they do, replied Oliver. Elves have strong ties to the natural energy that surrounds them, and have extremely powerful magical abilities. The man we are going to see is actually an elf himself. They refer to him as the Immortal, but his name is Arthur Carrick. Why is he known as the Immortal? And what makes you think he will know where my mother is being kept? Asked Alice. He will know, answered Oliver. As a young boy, Arthur was always curious about the natural energy around him, and how to properly tap into it until he finally succeeded, and gained the ability to manipulate the natural energy inside him, granting him the ability to live forever. He also gained the ability to hear the voices of all living matter, thus giving him the ability to know what was happening anywhere in this world, and in Albeck at any given time. These days, Arthur works as an information broker and sells information to whoever can offer him something that he sees value in. Wherever your mother is, he'll be able to tell us. Oliver and Alice arrived at Millennium and looked around for Richard before spotting him behind the bar, talking to one of the bartenders who looked to be struggling with the beer dispenser. Richard, said Oliver as he and Alice approached the bar. Richard looked up and took off his spectacles and smiled at the sight of seeing Oliver. Oliver, where have you been? Asked Richard. Has the whole thing with Ophelia been resolved or what? Not even close, Richard, replied Oliver. Ophelia killed Alice's friend tonight, and she might have taken her mother too. What? Replied Richard, now moving his eyes to Alice. I'm so sorry to hear that, you, Alice. Sorry, I haven't introduced myself. My name is Richard. You and I were very close friends in your previous life. My previous life? Asked Alice. Yes, your name was Gwen Marlborough, said Richard. Did Oliver not tell you? I'm beginning to think there's a lot he didn't tell me, said Alice as she looked up at Oliver and then looked back at Richard. There's no time for that now, interrupted Oliver. We need to go to Albeck, Richard. We need to go see Arthur. Okay, yes, sorry, apologized Richard. Listen, Oliver, I don't have a problem sending you to Albeck, but are you planning on taking Alice? What do you mean? Asked Alice. Arthur is not in the bar on the other side, replied Richard. That means he's out of the safe zone of the portal's proximity. If you do go to Albeck, you'll probably have to venture out and meet him at his home in the White Forest. Are you sure you can keep Alice safe after you leave the safe zone? I don't think I can change her mind, said Oliver as he looked down at Alice, locking eyes with her. She's going. All right, said Richard. Then follow me. Richard took Oliver and Alice to the back, but first took them to his office before taking them to the portal. I thought you might need a weapon, said Richard as he pointed at the various swords and blades that stood on the wall at the far end of the room. Thank you, said Oliver as he made his way to the wall in order to look for something that might suit him. While Oliver looked for a weapon, Richard moved up closer to Alice and tugged at her arm in order to get her attention. Hey, can we speak about something you mentioned a minute ago about Oliver? Asked Richard. Sure, said Alice. You said that there's a lot of things that Oliver hides from you, and to be fair, that is true. I've known Oliver for hundreds of years, but I've known you for just as long. What do you mean? Asked Alice. Like I said earlier, you aren't the first reincarnation of Helena that I've met. The thing is, I've known many of your reincarnations. Oliver has been my friend for a very long time, and I've seen him lose you so many times, and I can't help but feel sorry for him. Trust me, the last thing Oliver wants to do is hurt you or put you in danger. I think he just believes that the less he tells you, the slower your memories will come back, and you two will have more time together. It does seem kind of selfish, but you're all he's ever had. Just trust him. I think I'm ready, Oliver called out as he walked towards Alice and Richard. Alice looked over at Oliver and saw that he wore a beautiful silver sword in its sheath on his waist, and looked ready to take on any foe that would challenge him. Then let's do it, said Richard as he turned to make his way out of his office. Richard led Oliver and Alice to the portal that stood in the freezer in the kitchen, and Alice looked at the door to the freezer as if it was a joke. Oliver looked down at Alice and felt amused at the idea that Alice had the same expression he had when seeing the door for the first time as well. Richard opened the door and Alice looked into the portal, thinking to herself that not even in her wildest dreams would she have thought that something like this was even possible. But as she stared into the portal, she did not feel an ounce of fear or hesitation. Instead, she felt ready. She had lost her best friend that night, and her mother was also missing. She was angry and wanted to do something about it. She was done feeling helpless. Alice was now prepared to do anything in order to save her mother from Ophelia. "Ophelia has taken too much from me, Oliver," said Alice. "We'll take it back," replied Oliver as he too stared into the portal. "Are you ready? Let's go." Oliver took Alice by the hand, and the two entered Albec in search of Arthur. Chapter 27. The White Forest. Oliver and Alice yet again walked through the front doors of the Millennium Bar. But this time, everything was different. Alice looked around her and blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of the types of creatures that surrounded her. Oliver was not kidding. Werewolves, trolls, and elves really did exist. Something very interesting, however, that caught Alice's eye was the fact that there were humans in the bar too. "I didn't know humans lived in Albec too," said Alice as she looked at the humans in the bar. With their tattered clothes and dirty faces, all of them seemed to be starving and malnourished. "Yes, there are humans here too," replied Oliver. "However, they don't get treated too well, as you can see. This place was never made for humans to thrive. Earth would be much better for them in every way, but somehow they can't seem to leave." "How did they land up here in the first place?" asked Alice. "Vampires used to traffic humans into Albec as livestock hundreds of years ago. They would let the humans mate and build villages, and then take from their people whenever they felt like. It was like keeping them in a pen." "Oh my God," gasped Alice. "That's absolutely sick." "Yeah, it is. But we don't have time for them now," said Oliver as he grabbed onto Alice's arm and spun her around to face the exit again. "We're going this way?" asked Alice. "Didn't we just come from there?" "No, that's not how it works." Oliver and Alice walked out into the street, and the first thing Alice noticed was that the sky was dark as if it were nearing night. "Is it safe for us to be outside now at night, Oliver? Won't the vampires be walking about now? Perhaps we should wait till morning." "It's around noon here now, Alice," replied Oliver. "This is Albec." "But how can it be so dark if it's noon?" "Albec was made for magical creatures to be able to live just as normally as humans live on Earth. There is only one place where the sun shines in Albec, and it is the place that we are heading to." "What is this place?" asked Alice. "It's called the White Forest. It is a place where the trees are always covered in snow, but the nights are never cold. And even though the forest is thick with pine trees and the leaves are frozen, the sun still shines brightly due to a spell that was cast around the forest many years ago by a powerful group of mages who seek to escape the fighting and killing." "So why does Arthur live in the White Forest? Is he on the run from the vampires too?" "No, not at all. No one would dare to oppose Arthur. Arthur holds great influence within all the clans. He just enjoys the peace away from his work. Only a handful knows where he lives. Speaking of which, we better get going. We can't stay in one place for too long, and the White Forest is quite far away. We better get a horse." Oliver looked around and spotted a horse tied down outside of the bar, and checked to see if anyone was looking. When Oliver saw that no one else was outside, he signaled Alice to rush over, and the two mounted the horse and made for the forest. "The forest is about an hour away," said Oliver as the horse galloped through the sandy trails. "Also, the White Forest is enclosed by thick jungle, so we won't be able to go through with the horse. Do you think you'll be able to manage?" "I don't have a choice," answered Alice. "I need answers." "Okay, but Alice, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" asked Alice. "I can't enter the White Forest," said Oliver. "What do you mean you can't enter the White Forest?" "Because of the spell I told you about, Alice. It doesn't allow for vampires to enter. I've been trying to think about how we were going to get into the forest ever since Richard mentioned that Arthur was there. But I can't think of anything." "I'll do it, Oliver," said Alice. "No, we'll figure something else out," replied Oliver. "It's too dangerous to let you go in alone." "Listen, Oliver, we don't have any other options. I was the one who chose to come here. Maybe I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but it's too late and I'm our safest bet." "Are you sure, Alice?" "I'm sure." Oliver nodded and rode on until they came to the outskirts of the jungle. Oliver and Alice looked on and tried to see through the thick bushes, but they were hardly successful. The two got off the horse and undid the saddle before letting the horse free. "Anything you want to tell me before we go in there?" asked Alice as she gulped hard while the sweat ran down from the side of her face. "Yeah," replied Oliver. Chapter 28. The Dangers of the Jungle. As Alice and Oliver made their way through the jungle, Alice noticed that the jungle was much thicker than it looked from the outside, and that it was very difficult to move through it without clearing a path first. There were no trails, and the little light from the albec sky that was already quite faint became even more limited due to the thick leafy branches that hung over their heads. Alice looked over at Oliver, who looked to be scouting the area, his hand tightly gripping the hilt of the sword. "How deep into the jungle is the White Forest?" asked Alice as she made her way over a big log that stood in her path. She felt relieved that she had put on flat shoes that morning, otherwise this would have been impossible. "Right in the middle," replied Oliver. "The mages who created the White Forest created this jungle around it as well. I'm sure you've noticed, but these trees aren't exactly normal. Put your hand on the trunk of this tree over here." Oliver directed Alice to the tree beside him, and Alice put her hand on its trunk. Alice could not believe what she was feeling. Underneath the bark on the trunk of this giant tree was a heartbeat. A steady, calm heartbeat. The trees around her were more than what they seemed, they were alive. "What is their purpose?" asked Alice as she looked up to the highest point of the tree with her hand still following its pulse. Oliver came and stood next to her, placing his hand next to hers. The mages had created the White Forest in order to protect themselves from the vampires. And although that did help protect the inhabitants that took refuge, it didn't mean they were safe just yet. There were still many races like the werewolves who posed a threat to them. The mages were powerful with their magic, but they lacked in numbers and brute strength. Also, they had the disadvantage of having to take care of the people that lived within the White Forest because most of them were human, and wouldn't stand a chance in a fight against an army of werewolves. They thought long and hard on what to do when one day they finally figured it out. If they could limit the amount of forces, or at least break them into smaller groups, they would have a fighting chance. They decided to use their magic in order to create thick jungle that would put any army at a disadvantage, and also, because the trees are alive, they would be able to communicate to the mages exactly how many enemies they were, and their positioning, making it easy for the mages to wipe out large groups of their enemies. "That's absolutely brilliant," said Alice. "These mages must be pretty powerful. Maybe we could ask them for help against Ophelia. What do you think? Will they help us?" "They won't be able to," said Oliver as he took his hand off the tree and started walking again. "Why not?" asked Alice as she followed Oliver back through the jungle. "They've been dead for a very long time," said Oliver. "The mages had magical abilities strong enough to have kept them alive forever, but they gave up their immortality the day they decided to pour all their magical power into this jungle, in order to protect their people. Not long after that, they started to rapidly age, and they died within a couple of days. So does that mean we're safe? Does that mean that this jungle will take care of us as well? Seeing that these mages poured all their magic into it in order to make it safe?" asked Alice, still seeing Oliver with his hand on his sword. "No, it doesn't," replied Oliver. "The jungle was created to protect the inhabitants of the forest, not the people who walk through it. These trees are filled with creatures of the night who seek to kill anyone who tries to seek refuge in the White Forest. That's why we need to move as quickly as possible." Oliver and Alice had walked for an hour when they reached a stream that needed to be crossed in order to continue. The two looked both ways in order to see if there were any fallen trees that they could use as a bridge in order to get over, but they saw nothing. "How will we get over?" asked Alice. "Don't worry," said Oliver. Oliver picked Alice up and hoisted her into his arms, startling and confusing her. "What are you going to do, Oliver?" asked Alice, now looking nervously at Oliver. "I'm going to jump," said Oliver. "You're going to wah?" Oliver couldn't wait for Alice to finish her sentence. He had already taken a couple of steps back in order to have a run up. Oliver dashed forward, startling Alice, causing her to close her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she felt herself flying through the air and then falling back towards the ground. Alice held onto Oliver tightly as they descended and hit the ground. Alice opened her eyes, and rather than be relieved that she was still alive, Alice was more angry that Oliver didn't warn her first before almost making her heart leap out of her throat. Oliver put Alice down and held her back as she gasped for air. "You okay?" asked Oliver. "Yeah, just give me a heads up next time before you try to kill me." Both Alice and Oliver laughed until Oliver heard a sound coming from the trees in front of them. Oliver stopped laughing and pulled his sword out while pushing Alice behind him. "Someone is coming," said Oliver. "Who is it?" asked Alice. "I don't know," replied Oliver as he heard another sound coming from the branches above him. Oliver then heard the bushes to the right of him also being ruffled, and he turned his head to see the movement within the trees. Oliver and Alice stepped back with Alice still behind Oliver and Oliver holding on tightly to his sword. Oliver and Alice watched as two hooded figures emerged from the bushes, and a third jumped down from the trees above. The three men walked towards them and Oliver could see that they were vampires. "You two look like you've traveled a long way to die," said the man who stood in the center. "We're glad you came though, we haven't eaten in days." Chapter 29 Run. Oliver and Alice watched as their three attackers surrounded them. They looked into their attackers' eyes and saw the look of murderous intent. Oliver moved his head around, trying to keep track of the movements of the men around him. Oliver knew that on his own, he would be able to kill them easily, but now he was at a disadvantage. Oliver would not be able to charge anyone and keep Alice safe at the same time. Although he knew he was stronger, it was about numbers. Oliver knew that he didn't have many options, but he would need to fight until he could figure something out. Oliver's eyes moved quickly to the right as he saw one of the attackers charging at him, playing in Oliver's favor. Oliver stepped back, evading him and grabbing him by the collar, pulling him to the ground and snapping his neck. Oliver quickly turned to see another one of the vampires leaping into the air towards him. Oliver thrust his sword into the air, piercing the vampire in the heart and throwing his body to the side. The last vampire looked at Oliver and Oliver could see that he no longer looked as confident as he once did. The sweat ran from the side of his face as he looked at his comrades lying in defeat. Clearly Oliver was no ordinary vampire. Without hesitation and without even a thought of trying to save his comrades, the last vampire turned to run as he realized that he had made a grave mistake by trying to attack Oliver and Alice. As he turned, however, he quickly felt a hand grabbing him by the shoulder, stopping him from moving. "Where are you going?" asked Oliver. With one swing of his sword, Oliver decapitated the vampire who had tried to attack him and Alice. Oliver turned around breathing heavily, then rushed over to Alice, who still sat on the floor, but now had a look of horror on her face. "Alice, are you okay?" asked Oliver as he knelt beside her, putting the sword on the ground and placing his hands on her arms in order to stop her from trembling. "I'm fine," said Alice. "Are they dead?" "Yes, they are," said Oliver as he helped Alice to her feet. "But we need to keep moving. I hear some voices coming from the right of us. These three must have been scouts. We need to go now." Oliver started to run while holding on to Alice's wrist, but then turned around when he felt that Alice was not moving. "Alice, what's wrong?" asked Oliver as he put his sword down and moved up closer to her. "I don't know if I made the right decision coming with you, Oliver. All of this is crazy. I just saw you murder 3 men in cold blood and I can't just flip a switch saying that what I saw was okay. I know it's too late to turn back, but I'm freaking out and I don't know what to do." Oliver pulled Alice towards him and kissed her on the forehead before withdrawing and looking deeply into her eyes. "You know, earlier when you told me you wanted to come with me here to Albeck, I became so worried and I was completely against the idea. But the truth is, and I should have told you this sooner, Helena was a fighter. I have lived countless lifetimes with you, and in each lifetime you never once showed the traits of someone who lacked strength. I don't think you made a bad decision to come with me, Alice. But listen, Alice, I need you to do something now for me, okay?" "What is it?" asked Alice. "I need you to find that strength that I know you have somewhere inside you and use it. I can hear the sounds of other vampires coming after us, and if we don't move now, we'll be trapped. Our only option is to get to the White Forest." "Okay," said Alice as she straightened herself out. "Let's go." Oliver and Alice ran through the jungle with sounds coming from every direction. Oliver knew that they were surrounded, and this time it was more than 3 vampires. This time Alice was in actual danger. As the two ran between the trees, Oliver spotted the White Forest coming up ahead, but he could also hear the enemies not too far behind. Oliver could see that although the White Forest was not far, the enemies would catch up to them before they got there. "Stop," said Oliver as he halted and knelt against a big tree. "Wait, why are we stopping?" asked Alice, sounding confused. "Did you not say that the vampires were getting closer? I can see the White Forest from here, Oliver. We can make it." "No, we won't," replied Oliver. Oliver reached behind his back and pulled out a dagger and handed it to Alice. "You need to go alone from here," said Oliver. "Take this blade. I don't know what to expect in the White Forest, but I can't go in with you and I'll feel better knowing you have this." "Wait, why?" asked Alice. "Where are you going?" "I'm staying behind, Alice," said Oliver as he still tried to catch his breath. "If we both go, there's no guarantee we'll make it. They'll probably catch up to us in no time. We stand a better chance if you go alone. Also, you know, as a vampire I cannot enter the White Forest. I'll have to make my stand out here while you find the answers you're looking for." "Oliver, I can't just leave you," said Alice as she knelt next to Oliver with tears in her eyes. "How do I know you're going to be safe when I get back? What if the White Forest isn't safe either? Oliver, I can't do this." "You have to, Alice," said Oliver. "You came here for answers. We've done way too much to get to this point to leave without them. Maybe Arthur will know of a way that we can stop Ophelia. There's too much at stake for us not to take the risk. Now please run as fast as you can. I'll fend off these vampires and I'll be waiting for you when you get back. Okay, said Alice. But promise me you'll be okay. I promise, said Oliver. Oliver got up with Alice and kissed her deeply before watching her running off into the direction of the White Forest. When Oliver turned around, the enemy already awaited him. Oliver put his hands on the hilt of the sword, and looked around at the enemies that surrounded him with a smile on his face. Why are you smiling? Asked one of the vampires. Yeah, we're about to f***ing kill you for what you did to our brothers, said another. I'm smiling for many reasons, answered Oliver. You see, I've been so stressed lately and I haven't had anything, or anyone to take that stress out on. So I'm really glad that my girlfriend is finally safe and not here, because I wouldn't want her to see how I'm about to kill